Have your Bibles with you, go ahead and turn to Psalm 23. That's where we will be tonight. And as we talked about this morning, that the peace that is in the world, or that the world thinks about when it references the word peace, is different than the peace that God supplies. That in Matthew chapter 5, as Jesus begins to unpack and develop the Sermon on the Mount, he says that blessed are those who are the peacemakers. And given the backdrop of the people there and the culture there, with the religious elite in mind, basically what Jesus is saying is that the Jewish idea of peace is not the same as his. After his sin with Bathsheba, not a whole lot of peace. And even before that, as he was a young man between the nation of Israel and the Philistines, not a lot of peace. And even the scene that makes him maybe most famous among his own people was not a scene of peace. It was actually a scene of pieces, right? Pieces of stone, pieces of Goliath, and the routing of the Philistines. Yet here we find David in the midst of his life, with all the things that have happened, all the things that are, and maybe some things that are yet to come, is reflecting on his relationship with God. And he notes the peace that God provides as the great shepherd. So as you look through this text, and as we survey this text here tonight, understand that there are a couple of things that we need to understand. That the Lord is identified in verse 1 as the shepherd. David is not talking about anybody else but God here and his relationship with him. That would make David even the mighty king himself. Look at the humility that David has in knowing that he is not the shepherd, that he is a sheep. And that is crucial for you and me to understand exactly our place, not just in the cosmos, right? Not just in relationship to one another, but in relationship to God. Oftentimes, as we find success, as we find happiness, as we find maybe some worldly joy, sometimes we have a tendency to elevate ourselves to the level of God. And when I do that, I then become the master and commander of my own life. And then it's me who gets to make the final decision. It's me who gets to chart my path. It's me who gets to enforce my will. And it's me who gets to set my own course. And that oftentimes, as we see in the Bible, with character after character after character after character who does that, leads to destruction. Think about somebody who was a close associate of David when he was younger, a man by the name of Saul. Saul was a man who was given great opportunity, not just to be the anointed of God, but to be in a position of leadership, to carry out, think about that. God handpicked Saul to carry out his will. God handpicked Saul to carry out his will. And just like Saul, for you and for me, Peter writes that we are a royal priesthood. We are a chosen people. That God has chosen us in this vessel, these jars of clay, as Paul would write, to be the ministers of reconciliation to the world. That is the preeminent spot that anybody on the face of the earth could ever have. To be handpicked, adopted, as Paul would say in Ephesians, by God, so that we would be the ones to carry out his will. Now, I don't know about you, but that far exceeds, that mission, that purpose, that place, that position, far exceeds any promotion that I could ever get, any award that I could ever win, and any medal that could ever be pinned on my chest. But that can only happen when I see myself as a sheep and not as the shepherd of my own life. And so David says, the Lord is my shepherd. I have what I need. I mean, think about that statement. In referencing to the shepherd, the sheep says, the shepherd is all that I need to live, to thrive, survive, to prosper. And think about the time in which this was written. That's absolutely positively true of any shepherd of that time. If you were a sheep of that time, the only voice that you would listen to, the only voice that you would respond to would be the shepherd's voice. And that still happens today over in the Middle East of the nomadic herders that are over there. If one shepherd is in the area and his flock, and they mix and they mingle with another shepherd's flock, and he calls out to his sheep, the other shepherd's sheep aren't coming because they don't recognize the voice. And isn't that what Jesus says? Those who are mine recognize my voice. And they recognize that voice because they understand that in the totality of their life and the essence of their being, that God provides everything and all things for them to thrive. Maybe physically as well as spiritually. So let me ask this question for us tonight. How are we doing with our listening skills to the will of the Lord? The Lord is my shepherd. I have what I want. He makes me lie down, or he lets me lie down in really bad brown pastures. Is that what the text says? I mean, how bad of a shepherd would it be if the shepherd just takes his sheep out to eat, to graze, and he goes, let's go over there to that dirt patch over there, and you guys just have your fill. You know what happens if any type of animal eats too much dirt? It dies. I remember my Uncle Lynn, he used to breed horses. They took their horse to a show for a horse show, and they stayed near a beach, and that horse ate sand and it died. Died. Why? Because it ate something that would kill it. And I'm not talking just a little bit of sand. If it ate 2 grains of sand, it wouldn't hurt it, but it ate enough sand to kill it. And I don't know the situation and circumstances behind that, but whatever the reason, that horse found itself in a place where it could be killed. And maybe that horse didn't listen to the voice of its owner. I don't know. But here, David says that as he listens to the shepherd, as he follows the shepherd, it's the shepherd who leads them to green pastures. A picture of not just peace, but prosperity. A picture of much. He leads me beside quiet waters. A place of peace, of tranquility. Understanding that because the shepherd is the one who is leading, and because the shepherd is the one who is guiding, that sheep without a doubt knows that under the shepherd's watch and under the shepherd's eye and under the shepherd's counsel, it will find what it needs to survive, but it will also experience peace. He leads me along. He renews my life. He leads me down the right paths for his name's sake. And so not only does the shepherd provide the sustenance for a right life, a peace for a good life, he also guides the sheep down the right path. And Jesus illustrates this because whether you know this or not, or whether we recognize this or not, day in and day out, we have the opportunity and we make choices that lead us down a path. And there's really only 2 paths. There's the path that is wide that leads to destruction, and there's the narrow path, and in there, few find it, but it leads to eternal life. If you want to understand why you do have peace or why you don't have peace, check the path that you are on. In Proverbs chapter 7, Solomon gives this beautiful description of this young man who's where he's not supposed to be. He's in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong person. It is twilight. And he is down by her corner. And he is down on her street. And it's this lady who is dressed as a prostitute. And she convinces him and talks to him. And with as Solomon writes, with many smooth and convincing words, he goes down to his destruction. And there's so many things in the culture, in your life, in my life, that want to pull us off the right path to the wrong path. Isn't it interesting that in the garden scene, it wasn't anything that God said that made Adam and Eve do the wrong thing? It was another voice from somewhere else. And even as Paul writes his epistles to Timothy, he mentions people who have, Alexander the coppersmith, who has shipwrecked his faith. In Philemon, there's a man by the name of Demas who at one point in time is faithful to the word, is faithful to the church, and works in the church. But then in another section in 2 Timothy, Paul notes that Demas has found his way to destruction. And what happened there? It wasn't because he listened to the shepherd. It's because he listened to another seductive voice. And I don't know what he said, or I don't know what that group of people said that led Demas down that road, or led Alexander down that road, or led Saul down that road. But it probably had to do with one thing: pride. You know, when you spell out the word pride, what letter is right in the middle? I. But in following after the shepherd, the I is laid aside. And the father and the shepherd is the one who is the sole focus of the life. And he renews my life and he leads me down the right path. If you're on the wrong path, then what GPS do you have in your hand? What GPS do you have in your hand? What map, what road map are you looking at? So many people get to the wrong spot because they've got the wrong road, because they're not following the right path. I mean, isn't that interesting? Sometimes we'll even reflect on our own lives and we won't be in the spiritual spot that we want to be in, and we'll ask the question, well, how did I get here? As if the wrong thing and the wrong choices that have taken place in our life kind of just creeped up on us. Sin never creeps up on somebody by surprise. It always takes place with subtle decisions that have big consequences. And that's why being on the right path in the eyes of the right, or being under the wing of the shepherd, is so important. He renews my life. He leads me on the right path. But why does he do that? Notice the third piece of verse 3. For his name's sake. And this is something that we often struggle with, that because of our culture, and even not even just our culture, even from the beginning, we have a tendency to be so focused on self that even when God does something in our life, we take credit for it. But understand that the reason that we follow the shepherd is not just because of his grace, is not just because of his mercy, is not just because of his love, but because he is the one that can mold us and shape us into the people that we need to be, so that by our actions and by our words, people don't see Dean, people don't see you, people see God for his name's sake. I mean, think about that for a second. If you have a group of shepherds and everybody's saying, man, who's the best shepherd out there? Who treats the flock the best? You know how they judge who the best shepherd is? Well, what are the sheep doing? If you got a bunch of sheep that are obedient to the command and to the will of that shepherd, it is unmistakable. And that's how you can tell an experienced shepherd from the rookie. Because the rookie, most of the time, has the sheep going all kinds of sorts of places. You're not a very good shepherd if your flock is scattered everywhere. And you don't know where they are. But that's not how God shepherds his people. And notice this. Notice even the security, not just the peace that's involved in following the shepherd, not just the path that's involved in following the shepherd, but the peace that's involved here in verse 4. So even when I go, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear and tremble. That's not what it says. I will fear no evil. I fear no danger. Why? Because in and of myself, I can navigate this through my will? No. For you are with me. I don't know if any of you have ever done an escape room. Anybody here ever done an escape room before, or know somebody that's done an escape room? I've never done it. I want to do it. But I can imagine that if I'm in an escape room by myself, they might as well call it quits. I'm not getting out. But could you imagine just the pressure of being on the clock and saying, all right, I have to figure out in and of myself how to get myself by myself out of this room. And here's the thing about that. Most people that go to escape rooms, most people that operate escape rooms, you don't know them. You got no clue what's going to happen at the end of that 30 minutes or that hour or however long they let you stay in. Maybe there's just some people that are like, hey, you're just in here till you're in here. But I know for a fact that if it was just me, I wouldn't be comfortable with that because I'm just not good at figuring that kind of stuff out. But I know that if I've got another person with me who's got like the IQ of Einstein, right? Or who is a cold case detective or an FBI agent, I'm probably in good hands. Why? Because he knows more about that stuff than I do. Or a person who's actually done the escape room themselves. Or someone who operates and owns that very escape room. Right? Because they know all the intricacies of how to get out. Even if I am scared to death. I don't know what life holds for me. I don't know what life holds for you. But I do know this, that our Creator sees everything from the beginning to the end, and He has given us all the tools and capabilities and abilities that we need to navigate life, whether that is primarily green pastures, or whether or not that's a situation that we see, and I'm going to keep referencing it, in India. Those are some dark valleys that our brothers and sisters are in over there, but they do not fear it. Why? Not because they think that persecution is coming to an end tomorrow, but because they understand that no matter what tomorrow brings, God's faithful to them. And that's the peace. I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. But also, in understanding that darkness that God, invades that space, He also understands as the shepherd or as the sheep that there's no harm ultimately that's going to come to the flock that's faithful. Notice this for a second. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. I'm setting up a feast and the enemies are right there watching it. What? Now, I never made it to general in the Marine Corps, but I know this. As I'm navigating the terrain in Iraq, we are not going to stop on the middle of the road and set out a picnic basket and then hold up a sign in Arabic that says, Marines here, Al-Qaeda welcome. That just doesn't make any strategic sense. Why? Because I'm letting the enemy know that I'm here, and not only that, my guard's down, and I don't think that they're going to do anything. But when I am a sheep, and I have a shepherd like the Lord, the wolves can come, the wolves can growl, and the wolves can attack while I'm having my picnic. Because they're going up against something, a person who in all of eternity, as the Alpha and the Omega, as the beginning and the end, is undefeated. Name me a battle that the Lord's fought, and I'll show you that He's undefeated. And we need to live in that as Christians, that no matter what we go through, no matter what enemies we might face, no matter what persecution might come upon us, we have an inheritance that is undefiled, that is guarded and sealed by who? The Holy Spirit, for the time in which we take of it. And that's all because we belong to the shepherd's flock. And in that there is extreme peace. And I don't need to say any more of it. I probably kill you guys with it anyway. But that is what defines Paul's life. That's what defined early Christians. That they weren't scared of the Roman army because the Roman army couldn't kill their soul. We shouldn't fear any person, any people, any empire because they can't touch what lasts forever. And that's exactly what David says here. Only goodness and faithful love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord as long as I live. Now, that's an interesting statement to be made by David. Because if you think about David's life, there are a lot of times where he wasn't even near the physical house of the Lord. There are a lot of times where Saul had an issue with him and literally wanted to pin him to the wall. There was a son of David that sought to overtake him as king. There were multiple times where David was on the run. Actually, one of the last engagements that David has with Saul, he finds him in a cave, not in Jerusalem. So what does David mean by this section? Now, David certainly could be using hyperbole and saying, hey, I'll never leave the house of the Lord. It's certainly poetic. But if you look at the full spectrum, in light of what God has provided us with Christ, I believe that this is a foreshadowing of eternity made by David. That only goodness and faithful love will pursue me. See, when God pursues people, it's not to do them harm, but to bring them good and to bring them faithful love. And so that they might live in the house of the Lord forever. You know, one of the things that, and this is going to sound weird, but just bear with me. One of the things that encourages me about suffering and about pain is that there's a time, first I understand that the damage that sin has done because of the fallen world. But it also makes me look towards heaven a whole lot more. That when I see a brother or sister in pain and suffering, and I see the craziness that takes place in the world, it just makes me long for heaven even more. And to know that all of my brothers and sisters who are here, who have passed on, who I will meet in the future, at some point we will be able and we can understand and we can live in the present, the words of David as he alludes to the future. That we can live and understand and have peace in understanding that there will come a time in your life, in my life, as the flock of God and him as the shepherd, that we will live and reign and rule forever. I mean, that's awesome stuff. That's stuff to be excited about. That's stuff that should, wake my spirit up in the morning. And as I approach the doors of my house, say, you know what? No matter what happens today, I understand. No matter what's happened in my family, no matter what's happened at work, no matter what's happening in the country, no matter what's happening globally, I can understand and I can have a confident peace in understanding that there will come a day where forever will be for forever. That I no longer have to think about what forever is, that I will experience it firsthand. I will literally see the face of Jesus and the face of God with my brothers and sisters and David himself. That's peace. That I get to experience it later, but I can live in it now. As long as I live. And so David says, hey, you want peace in your life? Who's your shepherd? Who or what are you following after, listening to, acting on? Because he says here in Psalm 23 that it's the great shepherd that brings peace to the sheep. And for this family here, you know what never changes? You know what every bulletin has in it? A prayer list. Every bulletin that you will ever get will have a prayer list. And there are brothers and sisters that need some peace. And every bulletin you get and that I see will also have opportunities for us not just to experience peace, but opportunities to give it to somebody else. And maybe your life is restless, and maybe we're restless, and maybe we say and do the things with family, with friends, at work, because we've been listening to the wrong voice for too long. Because as this outlines the peace that the shepherd gives to the sheep, you can't find that. You can't find that in the world. I don't care what anybody says. You can't find that in the world. And if you're not experiencing that, maybe it's because for far too long you've been listening to the world instead of the shepherd. The peace that surpasses all understanding. The question tonight isn't just, do you want that or do you have that? The question tonight is, as you go home and as we lay our heads down this evening, who are we going to give that to? Through our actions and through our words. And if you don't have that, and if you do want that, make that known. And that doesn't, and you've heard me say this before, that doesn't necessarily mean coming up here and saying something to me. That means just getting with a brother or sister, either tonight after service, a phone call on Monday, a time to meet during the week and just say, I need some peace and I don't know what to do. Peace isn't just found at the end of the sinner's bench, so to speak. Peace can be found even outside of a service. So let's take advantage of that, either tonight or at some point during this week. Who are we going to give this peace to? Because the shepherd gives peace to the sheep. Let's dwell on these things as we stand and as we sing.